Okay, good evening. This is the second talk by Professor Krishna. It's on science and religion. Two complementary quests for truth, that's the title. So Professor Krishna has been professor of physics at Benares University. He's now retired. He was long-term director of the Krishnamurti School in Benares. Krishnamurti asked him to become a director of the Krishnamurti School for children from 6 to 18 years. But in that school there is also a women's college and a school for poor children. So it's a huge campus in Benares. And part of that school is also a study center, and now he's retired, but he's director of the study center. Similar to what we have in Ojai, the Krishnamurti Study Center, they have the same thing in India, in Benares. And he is in charge. So he has a scientific background and spiritual background, and he knew Krishnamurti personally, and he wrote about the meetings with him. That is Krishnamurti as I knew him. And he's the author of many books and articles, and you can check everything on the website. Okay. Thank you.
Good evening, friends. The scientific quest and the religious quest of man have been the two major quests of humanity. Somehow, in society, a feeling has developed that the scientific quest is antagonistic to the religious quest. And I would like to consider whether that is really so or it is something that comes about because we give rather narrow meaning to science and to religion. The purpose of the scientific quest is to understand the order that manifests itself in the external world of nature around us and the laws, to determine the laws governing that order. And the purpose of the religious quest has been to discover order in human consciousness. I should perhaps define what we mean by order in these two quests. In the scientific quest, the word order just means that things don't happen at random, that there are definite causes which relate to effects, and that there are definite laws which govern that relationship. And determining those laws is the purpose of science. In the religious quest, order doesn't pre-exist in consciousness. It has to be discovered through ending the disorder in our consciousness. Disorder in consciousness means here most of the negative emotions like fear or sorrow or hatred, jealousy and so on. All that constitutes disorderly states of consciousness as against orderly states which would be like love, compassion, joy, happiness, peace, non-violence, and so on. So it is in that sense one is talking about order and disorder. I think it was Socrates in the West who said that there is only one virtue, and that is order in consciousness. But that order doesn't exist in our consciousness unless we can end the causes of disorder in the consciousness and thereby discover what that virtue, state of virtue or state of order is. And that has been the aim of the religious quest. So I ask myself, why should the quest for discovering order in nature be in contradiction with the quest for discovering order in consciousness? Because both are two realities. The outer world of matter, space, time and energy is a reality, and so is consciousness a reality, functions within us. You could talk of the external world and the inner world of our consciousness. So why should the quest for truth about the outer world be antagonistic to the quest for truth about the inner world? Historically, this division came about in the time of Galileo, because some of Galileo's findings didn't agree with the concepts of the Christian church at that time, and then Galileo was persecuted for saying things which didn't agree with the church. And I think that marked the point where scientists and therefore science deviated from philosophy and this religious quest. Before that, you can find people who were engaging in both simultaneously. I'm told that Newton wrote more pages on religion than he did on science, although he's well known for his scientific work. And there were people like Leonardo da Vinci or Pythagoras, and a learned man was learned about everything, about consciousness, about religious issues, about scientific matters, about astronomy, mathematics, everything. But this separation is only about 350, 400 years old from the time of Galileo, and it has had some very dire consequences, because religion has been equated with belief. Unfortunately, in the Christian world, inquiry was kind of forbidden as heresy, and anyone who wanted to question the tenets of the church was put on the stake. But it was not so in other religions, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, in Jainism, and so on, the Eastern religions. There was belief, there was ritual and tradition, but there was also this whole tradition of inquiry. And in that inquiry, people were free to inquire into truth. And because religion in the West got equated with belief, and science would not accept belief, therefore the two deviated, separated. And the consequence of that is that in all education, because science was progressive and had to be taught to students, and it didn't go with belief, therefore religion or belief was thrown out of education, except maybe in the department of theology and so on as a specialization. But in general, in education, it was eliminated, which was like throwing the baby with the bathwater, because not only you have thrown away belief, but you have also thrown away religious inquiry and this quest for truth. Now it is not only Krishnamurti, but also the Theosophists had pointed out, and before them the Buddhists had pointed out, that truth is the highest religion. And truth here has a somewhat different meaning from what we attribute to it normally in our daily life in society. We use the word truth in various ways with different meanings. If your son comes back from school and you ask him what happened at school today, and he narrates an incident, you could ask him, are you telling the truth? And there by truth you mean, is your description an accurate representation of what actually took place, or are you distorting it? So that's one meaning we give to the word truth. The other, you could say, the law of gravitation is a great truth about nature. And there, what we mean by truth is that it's a definite law that has always holds, has been found to hold, and it relates cause to effect. Definite causes produce definite effects, and this law relates that, and therefore it's true, and that is one meaning of truth. But religious truth is neither of these. It's not a correct description, it's not an idea at all. It lies at the level of perception. To perceive what is true and what is false, and thereby to end the false. That is the quest for truth here, which ends illusion in the mind. And this means that the mind which is observing must not distort what it is observing. So in that sense, truth comes into existence when a consciousness perceives what is, namely the fact, without any distortion. So that is what is the essence of the religious quest. And therefore I see both science and religion as two complementary quests for truth. One is about the truth about the way nature functions, and the other is the discrimination between what is true and what is false, and the consequent unlearning of illusion or the false, unlearning the false, I would say. And this is connected with order in consciousness because the Buddha pointed out long ago, 2500 years ago, that disorder in consciousness arises from illusions in the mind, which means illusions are constructs of human thought or imagination which have no actual existence in nature. They are not like the tree out there. I can imagine a ghost, I can imagine a future. It's not a reality. It exists only in my imagination or in my thought. And therefore it's an illusion. And all disorder in consciousness arises out of illusions of various kinds. And therefore it can be ended, because illusion can be ended by perceiving what is true and what is false. And therefore that is what the quest, the religious quest is for. And that is the same as discovering order in consciousness or coming upon wisdom. You can use various words if you like, because there is very little wisdom in a mind that is full of illusion and living with all kinds of mental concepts and constructs which have no reality. So that you are living in an illusory world, you are not living in the real world or the factual world. And so I see these as two complementary quests, and the scientific quest has progressed enormously. We can see the consequences of it We said yesterday that our life has transformed very greatly in the last 100 years. The way we live outwardly has changed. But in the religious quest, in the understanding of oneself, in coming upon wisdom, we have not made much headway. And so I think we need to examine that. What could be the causes why in the scientific quest human beings have been so successful, and in the religious quest we are still lagging behind? Because as we said the other day, this lopsided development of the human mind, having a lot of knowledge and expertise about the external world, but very little understanding of the way one's consciousness functions, is responsible for most of the problems that we see today in society. And so if that has to be corrected, then we need to bring this religious quest back into education. But first we have to understand the nature of the two quests and also see for ourselves that there is really no antagonism between the two. If I look to the origin of the two quests, I find that they have a common origin, and that lies in the innate inquisitiveness which is there in the human consciousness. In the course of biological evolution, the human consciousness is perhaps the first which is imbued with this quality of inquiry or questioning and curiosity to find out what is taking place. Wherever there is a mystery, man wants to find out what that mystery is. So human beings have asked questions like, why does the sun rise and set? What are these stars and why do they twinkle? Why is the sky blue? How did so many different species come on earth? How does the seed become a tree? And so on. And our attempt to answer those questions has developed into what we call science today. And similarly, human beings right from the beginning of time have asked questions about what is right living? Is it possible to be free of sorrow, of violence, of hatred in one's consciousness? What is the purpose of life? What is death? Is it only the body that dies, or is there something else called soul or consciousness which survives physical death? And our attempts to answer all these questions have resulted in what we call religion, because there have been great sages who came upon a state of consciousness which could be said to be one of order or virtue, which had love, compassion, joy, happiness, and was free from the negative emotions. And around them, they built up a group of followers to whom they tried to explain that state. And these followers built a church around this individual. But usually, instead of discovering what their teacher was pointing out and discovering the truth of that for themselves, they became more concerned with praising the man as a hero, putting him on a pedestal, worshipping him, spreading his word, and creating a church which said, do this, don't do this, a membership and all that. That's how I think the various religions of the world came about. And the concepts that were given by different teachers became the tenets of that religion, the belief system of that religion. Concepts about God, concepts about how to pray, and various rituals that eventually developed around that. And that's how all the institutionalized religions have come about. But they are not part of the religious quest. They are byproducts of the religious quest. Jesus Christ didn't come upon the truth or the state of virtue or consciousness through the Jewish religion, nor did Buddha come to it through Hinduism. So they broke away from the past and came upon that state and then had insights which they tried to describe, and out of that came the teachings of the different masters. Similar thing happens in science, that science is the quest for the truth about how nature functions. But byproduct of that has been technology. Technology is man's use of science to fulfill his desires and his ambitions, or achieve what he wants to achieve in the world. And therefore, if he wanted to attack the enemy, he built weapons and so on, and used the science to do the weapon. But the science itself was not developed for that reason. There is this famous true story of how Faraday, when he discovered electromagnetism, demonstrated it in a hall to an audience. That was the first time that a human being had shown that there is a connection between magnetism and electricity. Before that, it was always considered that magnetism is a separate force and had nothing to do with electricity, which was quite a different phenomenon. So he took a coil of metal wire, connected it to a galvanometer, which is a current measuring instrument, and pushed a magnet from a distance towards it. And while the magnet was moving, he showed that the galvanometer recorded a current which was moving, flowed in that wire. And so there was the demonstration of a connection between magnetism and electricity. At the end of his talk, somebody asked from the back of the audience, "All this is very well, but of what use is this discovery?" And his answer, which has become a classic in the history of science, was, "It's a newborn child. Of what use is a newborn child?" So he was discovering that not in order to make microphones and cameras and motor cars and railway trains, all of which now use electromagnetism. He was discovering that just out of his passion for truth, that it is true. Later on, the technologies developed out of that, and that found great use, but he was not doing it in order to make technology. So I'm seeing this as a parallel, that technology is a byproduct of the scientific quest for truth. And similarly, I see it as a parallel that the established religions of the world are a byproduct of the religious quest for truth. So these are two quests for truth. The truth about nature and the truth about our consciousness. And the antagonism has arisen only because of not recognizing that religion is really also a quest for truth, but mistaking it for belief, for the tenets of the church and so on, which are byproducts. Exactly as people put the blame for the nuclear bomb and so on science, at the door of science. But science only gave the truth that energy and mass are related to each other, and that mass is also just another form of energy, which is a great truth about nature. That truth was not revealed with the idea that you will make a bomb. It's ultimately the human mind which uses that truth either for destruction or for construction. So the blame doesn't lie at the door of the scientific investigation. And similarly, I don't think the blame for religious wars really lies with the religious quest. It lies with the people who have crystallized it into the churches and then the beliefs and then the division that comes out of these beliefs. So belief is not really religious because the word religion comes from the original word religare, which is to unite, to bind together. And belief divides people because my belief can be different from yours. And if you assert your belief as true and I assert mine as true without knowing whether it is true or not, then it divides. And that has been the cause of so many religious wars and violence in the world. But you can't blame that on the religious quest. So we need to distinguish the byproduct from the main quest. Nevertheless, the fact remains that the scientific quest is of a different nature from the religious quest. And there are reasons why the scientific quest has progressed very much. And in the religious quest, we have remained somewhat primitive. And I want to examine those reasons, if I may. I also feel that there is a lot that we can learn from the way science is done. And that though the scientific method may not be applicable to the religious quest, the scientific approach or the scientific spirit has values in it which we can profitably employ also in the religious quest, in our religious quest. So I want to dwell a little bit on the scientific approach to truth. Not so much to describe the scientific method, but to deduce from it the values which have now come to be accepted as part of the scientific temper or the scientific values. Science itself doesn't deal with values. It is not science's job to tell whether you should be kind or unkind. It is not the realm of science. So it doesn't deal with values. But the way the scientific quest is done includes in it certain values which are called the scientific values. So the values are not the subject matter of science, but they are a byproduct of the scientific approach.